So today's lesson's on my favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt, and how he is the progressive president. Um, in the election of 1900, we actually have the election of McKinley again. It's going to be McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan again. William McKinley being portrayed as the imperialist, William Jennings Bryan being the vocal anti-imperialist. But things were definitely going to go well for McKinley because he had just won a war against Spain. He had acquired rich lands overseas, protected the gold standard, and then he picked this absolutely irresistible running mate, Teddy Roosevelt. The reason why he chose Teddy Roosevelt was not because he necessarily liked Teddy Roosevelt, but because Teddy Roosevelt was kind of becoming a celebrity. Because of his charge up San Juan Hill with the Rough Riders, everybody was really impressed with him and wanted to see more of him. But people in politics didn't particularly like him, and so they figured by putting him in the place of the vice president, he would be out of their hair for another 4 years, and they really wouldn't have to worry about him causing them any problems. And so he goes into to the role of the vice president, but only for 6 months, because President McKinley is actually shot and killed by a deranged anarchist. Little fun fact, William McKinley is the first American president to ever ride in an automobile, which was the ambulance that took him to the hospital after being shot. But Teddy Roosevelt, after the president was assassinated, had to be tracked down from where he was camping in the Adirondacks to take the oath of office. And at the age of 42, he became the youngest American president. Teddy Roosevelt is known as the first modern president. He was young, he was vibrant, he brought new excitement and power to the presidency that really had not existed before. He vigorously led Congress and the American public towards new reforms and a strong foreign policy. He saw himself as president as the steward of the people. It was his job to take whatever actions were necessary for the public good. He was what is known as a loose constructionist. He believed that he, as president, had basically whatever power was necessary to do what was important for the good of the American people. So we're going to start off looking at Teddy Roosevelt's role as an imperialist, and that goes with his foreign diplomacy, which is known as big stick diplomacy. He got this from an old West African proverb that said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," which basically meant that you try talking out the problems first, but you back it up with a lot of power, and that way people are more apt to agree with you. Whether it's your words or the big stick that gets them to agree is really neither the point. You just want them to follow along with what you want to get done. And the way that he's going to be using this first is a canal in Panama. The Spanish-American War showed us just how weak we were with our Navy. These ships would have to go all the way around South America just to be able to get to the east or the west coast, depending on which way they were going. And that showed just how weak our Navy could be if we had been attacked on both sides. So this is going to lead to the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty. This was a treaty signed by the United States and Great Britain that nullified the previous Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. And basically it said before that neither one would try and build a canal or try and take over Central America. We had to nullify this so that we could build this canal. And it was going to be good for us as well as for the rest of the world for shipping. At first, we decided that we were going to build the canal in Nicaragua, but that didn't really work out because they had a giant volcano that erupted. So we looked to Panama. Panama, unfortunately, was owned by Colombia, and so we had to ask permission. Colombia, being a little bit pissy with us because of a previous issue, decided that they were not willing to let us have the area for the canal. So, in our fashion, with the big stick, when words didn't work, we went with the force. And so Teddy Roosevelt just happened to have the U.S. Navy off the coast of Panama and helped the people of Panama have a revolution and overthrow Colombia and become an independent nation. Once they had done that, we gave them the option, hey, will you let us build a canal here and you guys will get to have, a whole bunch of money come from it? And they said, why, sure, America. And thus the Panama Canal began to be built. This was going to be probably the greatest achievement of its day. However, it was a lot more costly and a lot more dangerous than we had originally planned. The biggest issues were sanitation and disease. Lots of people dying from yellow fever and from malaria. However, it was the largest modern engineering undertaking to date, and it resulted in one of the greatest technological innovations in modern history, cutting shipping time from New York to San Francisco in half, from 13,000 miles to 5,200 miles. Another way that he used the big stick was using it in Latin America. A lot of countries in Latin America had debts to Europe, as you see in the cartoon here. And so these European nations were trying to get their money back. Makes sense. The problem was that we were afraid that they were going to start using violent methods to get their money back. And so Teddy Roosevelt creates something known as the Roosevelt Corollary. In this, he says that the U.S. would intervene in Latin America and collect those debts for Europe. This was an extension of the Monroe Doctrine, ensuring that there was no longer any form of colonization within the Americas. And America was going to be the big sister and using this big sister policy in action. In Asia, there is going to be problems between Russia and Japan. The Russo-Japanese War broke out over conflicts over claims of Manchuria and Korea. They actually asked President Roosevelt to be the arbitrator, to be the person to moderate or negotiate the peace talks because they just couldn't do it themselves. And so this brings about the Treaty of Portsmouth. Neither side was really thrilled because they didn't get everything they wanted, but that's what a true compromise is. And because of his mediation and because of how well this went, the president actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. And aside from President Obama, he is the only other American president to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Another issue that we have with Asia is here in America. We had fears of what we called the yellow peril, rising numbers of Chinese and also Japanese coming into America. And we were especially afraid of Japanese laborers coming here to California. Huge numbers were coming into San Francisco, and so they began segregating all Asian students from white students in schools. This created a problem with Japan, and so Teddy Roosevelt negotiated something called the Gentleman's Agreement, in which the School Board of San Francisco would repeal its segregation policy if Japan promised to halt the immigration of laborers to California, and it worked. Final thing that he did, sending out with the big stick, is the sending out of the Great White Fleet. This was America's hugest, most technologically advanced navy in the world, and they were called the Great White Fleet because they were painted this bright, bright white. They went out on a diplomatic goodwill mission around the world. And I use that term a little loosely because it wasn't just to say, oh, look at America, and we're out here trying to be the protectors of the world. We're sending out our Navy, leaving America unprotected, which means that we knew no one would want to attack us. We also sent out our Navy to let the rest of the world see just how big and strong it was so that they wouldn't want to mess with us. And so it really had the big effect of showing America's military muscle. Which brings me to Teddy Roosevelt as a progressive president. And he truly was a progressive president. And he used the office of the presidency to create social change that had previously been ignored. The first of these things that he did was create the square deal. And those of you guys are OCD are going to hate this because although it's a square deal, there's only 3 parts to it. It was called a square deal because it said that all Americans would get a fair and equal opportunity from their government. His goals were to have control of corporations, to have consumer protection, and conservation of nature. And so each of these 3 things combined together were it meant to basically ensure that all Americans were protected from big businesses, from their government, and had an equal opportunity. Another way that he was a progressive was as a negotiator with business. You have something known as the anthracite coal strike, and this was happening in Pennsylvania with the United Mine Workers. They were looking for better pay, better hours, and better housing. They went on strike, and the people that owned the mines were not willing to negotiate. It got to the point where the owners of the mines called in the president to put down this rebellion. Before, presidents had been more than happy to do that, but Teddy Roosevelt thought differently. He said, if you guys can't talk it out, then what I'm going to do is I am going to actually take over the mines. The government will run them in the interest of the public, and you will make zero money. So if you guys can't be big boys and sit down and talk out your problems, I'll solve them for you. And lo and behold, the problem was solved. But one of the things he's probably most known for as a progressive is as a trust buster. He believed there was a difference in trust, difference in monopolies, that there were good trusts and bad trusts. An example of a good trust would be U.S. Steel. He believed that that Carnegie Steel had reasonable prices and provided good services to the industry, to the entire industry. But J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities Company, he considered to be a bad one because they jacked up rates and exploited consumers. Morgan was really unhappy with this, and so he brought a suit, he actually ran into the White House bellowing that he was being treated by a common criminal, and the president informed him that no compromise would be reached, that the matter was to be settled by the courts, and Roosevelt told him that as long as his other businesses were not doing anything wrong, they wouldn't be prosecuted. This is going to be further supported through the Elkins Act and the Hepburn Act. And Teddy Roosevelt is going to be portrayed as Jack the Giant Slayer. How this role of the president, which normally had actually been a fairly small role in business, is actually going to be defeating these massive business giants. And finally, as a progressive, TR the naturalist. Teddy Roosevelt grew up outdoors, and he loved nature. And so he wanted to ensure that this was available for future generations. He became good friends with John Muir of the Sierra Club and guided him in Teddy Roosevelt's kind of natural preservation ideals. The Newlands Reclamation Act was created to provide water to many parts of the desert area of the West, specifically here in California. Because of the Newlands Reclamation Act, that is why that whole area between Los Angeles and San Francisco in the Central Valley is so lush with vegetation. It's because we are redirecting water so that we can create great agriculture out here. But he and Muir did disagree on one particular area, and that was with Hetch Hetchy Valley. This is in kind of the Yosemite area, and Muir wanted to preserve it because it's this beautiful gorge, this natural gorge. But Teddy Roosevelt decided that it needed to be dammed up. They needed to dam the river to allow for irrigation. And this is one of the largest providers of water to San Francisco. Without it, San Francisco would be nothing more than a tiny little port town. So with all these things together, and what we will discuss in class, you will discover why Teddy Roosevelt is the greatest president we ever had, and why he's pretty much more awesome than you and I will ever be. I'll talk to you guys later.